Hey there, welcome back to the Posture Project. I'm Justin Archer, aka the Posture Guy, and today we're going to be talking about something that has become somewhat of a litmus test, or prerequisite, if you will, as to determine whether or not you have full range of motion and functionality of your body. And what I'm talking about is the dreaded toe touch, where you have your legs straight and you bend down to touch your toes. Well, the reason I think that this is difficult for so many people, and why once upon a time it was difficult for me, is actually the mindset that people are approaching this exercise with. And most people approach it with, okay, if I can't do it, if I'm having difficulty doing it, I need to stretch my hamstrings, my calves, my back, my butt, and all that. They just think of the posterior chain. But they totally neglect the anterior chain, the muscles on the front of you, as well as the muscles above and below what most people focus on stretching, which is their hamstring muscles. So today, what I want to show you is some tools, some exercises you can use, and some different techniques and methods to improve your hamstring flexibility without directly stretching them, okay? So before we get into the exercise movements, we're going to just have a quick little anatomy lesson. So a lot of times when people think about going to touch their toes, they think about, okay, the muscles have to stretch, and they're thinking just in terms of muscle. We got to remember, we got muscles, tendons, ligaments, bones, we got joints where all this movement comes from. But the one thing that kind of binds all those things together is fascia. Now, if you're not familiar with what fascia is, or myofascia, you can do a quick Google search. But if I were to sum it up, it's kind of the glue that holds everything together. It's like a giant sack that intertwines between our muscles, our tendons, our ligaments, our bone, and everything. It's almost like holding or wearing a giant onesie. And if you've ever worn a onesie or any clothing, if you start to get tension in one side, it affects the same piece of cloth, right? I'm pulling here on the upper right-hand portion of my shirt, and you can see it's affecting the lower left hand. Well, imagine if this shirt was a onesie and it encompassed all of me. If there's tension in one part of it, it's going to restrict the movement in another part. Make sense? So keeping that in mind, we're going to go after, again, that hamstring flexibility and being able to touch your toes without stretching the hamstrings, okay? And again, this was, I can't exactly remember back how far, but years ago I made this mindset change where I thought, okay, instead of just thinking about this as a stretch, I'm going to think about it as a strengthening exercise. So where most people lose the range of motion is, they'll go down and touch their toes. Now they think about just stretching the back of themselves. And if I do that, that's about as far as I can go over. Maybe a little bit more, right there, okay? That's about as much stretch as I have in my hamstrings and in my back. And you can see my back's completely rounded. Where most people are kind of, as they say, leaving a lot of money on the table, or in this case, leaving a lot of motion on the table, is they don't think about moving their pelvis. Or because of the sedentary lifestyles we lead, they can't. Maybe it's that they don't know, they just literally can't move it. And so when I started thinking about strengthening my hip flexors and the anterior side of me so that then I can move the pelvis there, now this became so much easier. So I flipped it. I thought, okay, instead of stretching this, because I already spent plenty of time doing that, I'm going to strengthen the heck out of my hip flexors and the anterior side of my body so I can literally fold my body in half, and now this becomes a lot easier, okay? So, a couple ways that you can do that. Again, think of what is above and below the hamstrings so that you can affect it, okay? So, one of the best things you can do is go out, get a lacrosse ball. You can use a tennis ball or a golf ball too. I like the lacrosse ball. You want a ball that has some firmness to it. So I would probably say a tennis ball might be too soft, but a lacrosse ball or a golf ball would work nicely. And spend a minute or two on each foot just rolling the tissue on the bottom of your foot, really, especially in those arches. But just go from the heel to the big toe, heel to the second toe, heel to the third, so on and so forth, all the way out into the pinky. And then even put it in the arch down at the bottom and just kind of put as much weight as you can comfortably on it. Same thing with the upper arch towards the big toe joint. And just spend a minute or two finding those really sore, kind of achy spots and just really working at it. If you've never done this before, I'll admit it's probably going to be pretty uncomfortable. And then switch sides and do the same for the other foot. What this is doing is going after the plantar fascia on the bottom of your foot so that when that releases, again, remember that analogy, the onesie analogy. If I'm wearing a onesie and I got my kind of booties, if you will, kind of all bound up and taut here, it's going to make the calf and the hamstring and everything a lot more taut. But if you loosen up that tension in the onesie, the fabric, now you're going to have a lot more mobility upstream of the foot. Okay, so that's what we're doing. We're giving more slack to that fascia. So that's number one. Number two is we're going to do what's called static extension position. So basically what you do is you get down on your hands and knees, kind of like you're going to do cats and dogs. And from here, you move your hands one hand length forward, okay, and then move your shoulders over your wrist, drop your shoulder blades, and then let your head relax. And you're going to hold this for 2 minutes. Just let your stomach relax, and notice the position of my pelvis, my waistline, how it's tipped forward like that. So what we're doing here is actually getting my pelvis, getting used to being, in that extend position, extending my back, and really loosening up all the fascia throughout my spine. So again, as a result of that, giving more slack to the fascia in my hamstrings. So you hold that for 2 minutes. Then we're going to go into what's called upper spinal floor twist. You basically lie on your side, every joint at 90 degrees here. So ankles at 90, knees at 90, hips at 90, shoulders at 90. Basically start like a closed book cover. Put this bottom hand on top of the knees. Very important here, you want to make sure the knees stay stacked. Top knee should always stay right over the bottom knee. And then bring this hand up and over. Follow it with your head and let it fall to the other side. Good. And just breathe here. Keep your knees together, but breathe into your side. Each time you exhale, let that arm drop. And you're going to spend 1 to 2 minutes. 1 minute should be fine, but 1 to 2 minutes per side. Then you'll bring that back up and over. Take a breath or two before switching sides. Then you're going to go back to your hands and knees. You want your hips over your knees, shoulders over wrists, and we're just going to run through 10 cats and dogs. So you go into the cat position, breathe out. Go into the dog position, inhale, and let the shoulder blades drop together. Exhale as you go into the cat. Inhale into the dog. And you're just going to do 10 of these. Each time you go into dog counts as 1. Okay. Remember to let those shoulder blades drop together as you go into dog. Good. And then what I want you to do is, after you've done those, is go ahead and stand back up and go ahead and again try to touch your toes. And think about not just bending and stretching from the back of your body, but I want you to engage. I want you to tighten your thighs. I want you to think about a crease running right here in your hips and bending forward. Like if you were diving forward, keep your back flat, right into the last bit until you dive into the pool, and then go down. And notice how much easier. I mean, I know I was already touching the ground, but I mean, look, I'm almost starting to get my elbows down closer towards my toes. And notice, or you should notice, how much easier it is and how much more range of motion you have in your hip joints. And you really probably won't notice much difference as far as how your hamstrings feel. So when you're trying to improve your range of motion so you can touch your toes easier, don't get caught up on one part of the body, in this case your hamstrings. Remember, your body works together as a unit. So if you're bound up, if you're somebody whose upper back looks like this and your shoulders are round and forward, that's going to take away from the range of motion in your hamstrings. Same thing, if your calves are tight or your feet are always kind of tight and sore and you got bunions and heel spurs and plantar fasciitis and all that, well, you're going to be bound up there and you're basically taken away from the range of motion of the hamstring. So loosen up what's above, loosen up what's below, and then what's in the middle will function a lot better and you'll have a lot more range of motion. Okay? So anyways, I hope this was helpful. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comment section below, and I look forward to seeing you guys inside the next video. Until then, take care and keep moving.